Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are so glad you're here with us today because today we are looking at something that challenges, well, pretty much everything you think you know.
It really does. It's a total departure from the usual.
Yeah, we usually look at, business trends or history or new tech. But today we are digging into the mechanics of reality itself.
A literal deep dive into the unknown.
Right. And we are pulling from a very specific, very fascinating source. We are looking at the Seth Material, specifically Session 248 from the Early Sessions, Book 6.
And for those of you who might be new to this, or maybe you've heard the name Seth and you think, oh, it's just some new age fluff.
Which is a totally normal reaction, by the way.
Completely normal. But we are going to ask you to just suspend that judgment for the next hour or so. Because the physics we are going to discuss today, the nature of time, the way perception actually creates matter, it is honestly closer to advanced quantum mechanics than it is to ghost stories.
It really is. It gets incredibly scientific. But before we get totally lost in the multiverse, we do have a very important bit of housekeeping to take care of.
Yes, we do. We need to state very clearly for the record that this podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
Exactly. Our whole mission here is just to analyze the source material, see what makes it tick, and hopefully, learn something new without taking any sides or endorsing anything. We just want to explore the ideas.
Okay, housekeeping is officially done. Let's set the scene for this.
Please.
It is April 4th, 1966.
A Monday night.
Right, a mundane Monday night. We are in Elmira, New York. The time of record is exactly 9:00 p.m.
And it's funny because when I think of 1966, I'm thinking of the space race or the Beatles, big, loud cultural moments.
Right, totally.
But in this specific living room on this specific Monday, the vibe is just incredibly quiet. Intimate.
It's very domestic. You have Jane Roberts, the author and the medium, and her husband, Robert Butts. And Rob is just sitting there with a pen, ready to take notes in shorthand.
And the notes for this session are almost funny because they start off so incredibly normal.
Yeah.
Like, Jane wasn't smoking, which is apparently a massive headline event.
Oh, for Jane Roberts, yes. She was a very prolific smoker.
Right.
So the fact that she wasn't smoking that night really suggests a certain calmness in the room. Or maybe just a shift in her usual routine. And they were actually supposed to have guests over that night.
The Wilburs.
Yes, a couple called the Wilburs, but they canceled at the last minute.
I love that little detail so much because it feels like this huge sliding doors moment. If the Wilburs had actually shown up, maybe they all would have just sat around drinking coffee and talking about the weather or local politics.
Probably.
But because they canceled, the living room was empty. The energy was totally focused. And Seth came through with some of the most complex, heavy-hitting physics in the entire book.
It's that exact mix of the mundane and the metaphysical that makes this material so compelling. You have a quiet room, there's a radiator rattling in the corner, which we will definitely get to later, and then suddenly, boom, you are discussing whether Napoleon actually won the Battle of Waterloo in a completely different dimension.
It gives me actual chills.
Yeah.
But okay, let's start with the hook. The thing that grabs you right out of the gate in this session. It's this analogy about a ball.
Ah, yes. The ball that never lands.
Right. So I want you, the listener, to try this right now. Visualize yourself holding a baseball. You are standing in a big open field. You wind up and you throw that ball as hard as you possibly can.
Just a standard physical action.
Exactly. You watch it leave your hand. It travels, let's say, 20 feet through the air. And then you close your eyes.
Or you just turn your head away. You completely stop paying attention to it.
To you, the person who threw it, the action is over. The ball is gone. It has literally left your reality.
Right. In our conventional, everyday way of thinking, we just assume the ball continues in a straight line, it hits the grass, it rolls a bit, and it stops. Cause and effect. Linear time.
But Seth steps in here and says, you are wrong.
He says you are fundamentally misunderstanding the entire nature of energy. He argues that the ball doesn't stop moving just because you aren't looking at it anymore. And more importantly, and this is the part that kind of hurts my brain, it doesn't just keep going straight.
It explodes.
It explodes in every possible direction simultaneously.
Meaning what, exactly? That the ball, duplicates itself into a million little balls.
In a metaphysical sense, yes. Seth argues that every single action we take is just the very beginning of a ripple. We only see one tiny, narrow slice of that ripple, the straight line version where the ball lands in the grass.
Because that's all our eyes can track.
Exactly. But in what he calls the spacious present, the wider actual reality, that energy is fulfilling every other probability. In one reality, the ball hits a window. In another reality, a bird swoops down and catches it. In yet another, it just never lands at all.
So we are basically walking around all day with blinders on. We're seeing one version of the movie while 20 other versions are playing on the exact same screen at the exact same time.
That is the core thesis of session 248. And it ties into three massive concepts that we are going to break down today. First, the illusion of perception, why we only see the one ball. Second, the spacious present, and the idea that history is actually changeable. Which brings us to the Napoleon bombshell.
Spooky stuff.
Very. And finally, we are going to look at a tangible test. Because it is really easy to sit around and talk about multidimensional baseballs, but Seth actually proves it in this session with an ESP experiment involving a teenager's handwriting.
That ESP experiment is so wild, it involves a copper button that wasn't even in the room.
It is absolute proof of concept, the smoking gun of the episode.
All right, let's get into section 1, the illusion of perception. Seth essentially starts the session by looking at Jane and Rob and telling them, you guys are barely seeing anything at all.
He opens with a bit of a challenge to them. He says, and I quote, "By now it should be obvious to you that you perceive only a small portion of reality. Indeed, that your idea of reality is formed and limited by your perceptions."
Formed and limited. That is such an interesting distinction to make. It's not just that we are missing things. It's that our perception is actively building the walls around us.
Correct. Think of your physical senses, your eyes, your ears, the nerves, and your fingertips as a filtering system. We usually think of our senses as windows, right? Letting the outside world in.
Yeah, of course.
Seth says, no, they are actually barriers. They block out 99% of reality so that we can focus on this one highly specific physical life without losing our minds.
Because if we saw everything all at once, we would just short circuit.
We would be completely overwhelmed. We wouldn't be able to function or learn anything. He uses this great example about atoms and molecules to explain how this works. He says the matter we see as a physical object, like the chair you are sitting in right now, is just our specific biological interpretation of energy.
He actually says realities that you can only perceive in terms of light can, for example, exist as sound, as motion, as color.
Stop and really think about that for a second. To us, a chair is solid. It's static. It is usually completely silent unless it's got a squeaky leg.
Right.
But Seth is saying that to an entity existing in a different system of reality, that exact same chair isn't a solid object at all. It might be perceived entirely as a sound. It might be a chord progression.
So I'm sitting on a symphony.
To another entity, yes. You are sitting on a frequency of sound. To someone else in another dimension, you might be sitting on a flash of blue light. The underlying energy of the chair is exactly the same, but the camouflage, the way it appears to the observer, depends entirely on their specific sensory equipment.
It's like, okay, imagine we are radios. We are tuned to 98.5 FM, and on 98.5, the data comes through as physical matter. But if you were to reach out and turn the dial to 102.7, that exact same data comes through as pure emotion or color.
That is a perfect analogy. We sit here and think the music on 98.5 is the only music existing in the air anywhere, but the air around us is absolutely thick with 1,000 other signals that we just do not have the antenna to decode.
Which naturally leads to his point about space.
Yeah.
And this is one where I usually get a bit stuck, honestly. Seth says distance has absolutely nothing to do with space.
It's a very bold claim.
It's a frustrating claim.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm driving to work and I'm stuck on the highway for an hour, distance feels extremely real. My empty gas tank tells me distance is a real physical thing. How can he say it has nothing to do with space?
Because he's distinguishing between physical space and essential space. In our physical game, this specific reality we live in, we have all agreed at a subconscious level to play by the rules of time and space. To get from point A to point B, you must traverse distance. You have to burn gas. That is the rule of the physical game.
Okay, I follow that.
But in the inner reality, the universe behind the scenes, there is no distance. Everything is totally instantaneous. Connection is immediate. He's saying that space is just a mental concept that we use to separate things so we don't experience the entire universe all at once.
So distance is basically just a buffer zone.
Exactly. It's a psychological safety buffer projected outward into physical reality.
He brings up quasars right around here, which I thought was such an incredible time capsule moment for 1960s.
Oh, absolutely. We have to remember the context. This is early 1966. Quasars, quasi-stellar radio sources, were the hot new mystery in astronomy. Scientists had just discovered these things out in deep space that looked like stars, but they were billions of light years away and putting out more energy than entire galaxies combined.
They completely broke the laws of physics as we understood them at the time.
Right. And Rob, Jane's husband, had actually asked Seth about them in a previous session. He was trying to get Seth's take on this huge scientific anomaly,
Almost trying to stump him, maybe?
or at least see if Seth could explain what NASA and the world's best astrophysicists couldn't. And Seth's answer is fascinating because he doesn't give them a mathematical formula. He gives them a perceptual answer.
What's the gist of his explanation?
He essentially says that we are totally confused by quasars because we are looking at an intrusion of energy from another dimension into our own physical universe.
An intrusion, like
Yeah.
it's leaking through.
Yes, imagine a three-dimensional object passing through a two-dimensional world. If a solid sphere passes through a flat piece of paper, to the little stick figures living on the paper, it just looks like a circle that starts tiny, gets massive, and then magically vanishes. It breaks all their rules of flat geometry.
Right, because they cannot perceive the up and down of the sphere. They lack the dimension.
Exactly. Seth says quasars are simply massive energy from a totally different reality system projecting into ours. But because we only have our physical instruments, our optical telescopes, and our radio dishes, we try to measure them using our laws of physics, and they just don't fit the math.
Let me grab the quote here. He says, "It is natural, of course, that you interpret projections from other realities into your own according to the laws and limitations that seem to apply to your own system."
We are trying to measure a ghost with a wooden ruler. It just doesn't work.
He sums this whole section up with a phrase that I underlined 3 times in my notes. He says, "The universe is transparent to the inner senses."
That is the ultimate key right there. If we stop trying to look at the universe with just our physical eyes, which are intentionally limited, and start using our intuition, our inner senses, the mystery resolves itself. The universe isn't actually hiding anything from us. We're just trying to view a panorama by staring through a tiny keyhole.
Which brings us perfectly to the biggest keyhole of all, time.
This moves us right into section 2 of our breakdown, the spacious present.
This is a term Seth coined, isn't it?
Yeah.
The spacious present.
He uses it extensively throughout all his books. It is his alternative to the concept of a timeline. I mean, most of us view time as a straight line. Past on the left, future on the right, and the present is just this tiny little dot moving relentlessly along the line.
And once that little dot moves past, say, the year 1999, then 1999 is gone forever. It's dead and buried.
Seth says no. That is an illusion. Imagine a landscape instead of a line. You are in a helicopter, hovering high over a giant, beautiful valley. You can see the snow-capped mountains way out to the west. Let's call the mountains the past. You can see the river directly below you. That's the present. And you can see the ocean way out in the east. The future.
So from the helicopter, I can see them all at the exact same time.
They all exist simultaneously. Just because you, in the helicopter, happen to be looking straight down at the river right now, that doesn't mean the mountains behind you suddenly stop existing. They are still there. The snow is still falling on them. You just aren't looking at them.
So wait, does that mean the dinosaurs are still roaming the Earth right now, just in a different part of the landscape?
In the spacious present, yes, absolutely. All events, past, present, and future, are occurring simultaneously in this vast, eternal... No, it isn't a linear progression. It is spacious. It literally has the room to hold everything at once.
Okay, I can grasp that intellectually. It's a pretty common sci-fi trope at this point. But then in the session, Seth takes this really hard left turn into something that is honestly terrifying. He starts talking about changing the past.
This is the part where he completely leaves standard theoretical physics behind. He says, if the individual can change his own past, then it must follow that a people can change its past, that the future can influence the past historically.
The future can influence the past. That breaks my brain. Usually we think it's strictly the other way around. My parents met, and because of that cause, I was born. Cause leads to effect, always forward.
Seth suggests the causality goes both ways across the landscape. He gives this very cryptic, chilling example. He says, a death can alter a birth.
What does that even mean in practical terms? A death can alter a birth.
It implies a massive temporal feedback loop. Let's say a major cataclysmic event happens in the future, a tragic death, or maybe a massive global revelation. The psychic energy of that future event is so incredibly strong that it sends shockwaves backwards through the spacious present. It might subtly shift the circumstances of a birth that happened 40 years prior. It might change the subconscious motivations of the parents in the past.
So history isn't written in ink at all. It's written in, like wet cement.
It is constantly shifting and settling based on where we are standing right now. We are constantly recreating our own past to perfectly align with our current vibration and our current beliefs.
And this leads right to the Napoleon comment. This is the moment in the transcript where I literally put the book down, stopped reading, and just stared at the wall for a minute.
It is a total showstopper of a concept. You have to picture Rob sitting there, writing furiously in shorthand, probably just trying to keep up with the quasar mathematics, and Seth just casually drops this bomb. He says, in some dimension, Napoleon conquered Europe completely, and the actions resulting from that probability continue in that dimension.
In some dimension, Napoleon conquered Europe completely. He's not speaking metaphorically there. He doesn't just mean like in Napoleon's fever dreams.
No, he is being entirely literal. He emphasizes that the physical actions resulting from that victory are real. The history of that version of Europe, a Europe where French is spoken from Portugal all the way to Poland, where the entire geopolitical map of the 19th and 20th centuries is totally different, that history is ongoing. It has its own future, its own breathing people, its own solid reality.
That is just huge. Means that facts aren't actually facts. We open a history textbook, it says 1815 Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon lost. We call that an objective fact. Seth calls it a probability.
It completely destroys the idea of a single objective destiny for humanity. It suggests that every single time a major decision is made, whether by a single person or an entire nation, reality literally splits. All probabilities are explored and fulfilled.
So somewhere out there in the spacious present, people are eating much better pastries in London.
Highly likely, yes. And perhaps their entire legal system is based on the Napoleonic Code. The central point is that reality is just as physically real and solid to the people living inside it as our reality is to us. We are not the main timeline. There is no main timeline. We are just a timeline.
It's the ultimate cure for regret, isn't it? When you really internalize it.
How do you mean?
Well, you know how we all lay awake at night staring at the ceiling thinking, oh man, I really should have taken that job in Chicago 10 years ago. Or I shouldn't have broken up with that person. Seth is saying, hey, relax. You did take the job. You didn't break up with that person. Those alternate versions of you actually exist. They are living those exact lives right now, happily or unhappily.
It is very comforting in a way, but it's also a massive responsibility, because if the spacious present is real, it means we are never just victims of our past. We are co-creating it in every single moment. We can literally change the trajectory of the ball even after it has left our hand.
Which brings us right back to the ball. This is perfect. We are entering section 3, the ball analogy.
Seth circles back to this visual image, and now that we kind of understand the spacious present and the whole Napoleon probability thing, the ball makes a lot more sense.
Let me read this part. Seth says, you perceive but the smallest portion of any given action. It does not occur to you that there is more to perceive.
He's really pushing Rob and Jane here. He desperately wants them to break out of their linear, three-dimensional box.
And Jane, while she is deeply entranced channeling Seth, she actually starts getting very physical during this part of the session, right?
Yes, Rob's notes describe her violently thrusting her arms out in front of her. She's physically trying to demonstrate the explosion of the action. She says the thrown ball doesn't just go linearly away from you. It goes out in all directions at once.
So in our narrow reality, the ball lands safely in the grass.
Yeah.
In another probability, the ball veers left and breaks a neighbor's window. In another, a massive gust of wind catches it and it rolls into the street. All of these things happen simultaneously the moment the energy is released.
And the listener, you are the thrower. You are throwing these metaphysical balls all day long. Your thoughts, your spoken words, your tiny daily decisions.
Seth actually gives a specific exercise here to help them grasp this. And I really think we should try to describe it because it's a bit trippy, but it's something you can sit and actually do.
It's a great exercise. He says, try to catch yourself in a very simple act. Speaking a single word, for example. Let's say the word is hello.
Okay, hello.
He says, first, try to feel the muscular beginnings of that word in your throat and your chest. The pure physical intention right before the sound actually comes out. But then, and this is the weird hard part, try to imagine that spoken word not just as a sound wave, but as a color, as physical bulk, as density.
Imagine the word as a color. That sounds like literal synesthesia.
It is. He's asking you to cross your senses. And then, he says, imagine the mysterious, complicated ballet of how that one single word fundamentally changes the person hearing it. Not just shifting their temporary mood, but altering my actual biology. The new electrical signals firing in their brain. The tiny chemical release of hormones. The brand new actions it prompts them to take an hour from now.
It is like the butterfly effect, but immediate and multidimensional. One simple word isn't just a sound vibrating in the air. It's a massive event that ripples out across the spacious present forever.
Exactly. Seth wants us to realize how incredibly powerful we are. We constantly walk around thinking we are these tiny, insignificant beings in a huge, cold universe. But he's saying every single thought you have is a quasar. It is projecting massive energy into multiple dimensions simultaneously.
It is a genuinely beautiful thought. It really, really is. But I can hear the skeptic in the back of the room. He's crossing his arms and shaking his head.
The skeptic is always there. What is he saying?
The skeptic says, look, this is great sci-fi, it's wonderful philosophical poetry, but where is the actual proof? How do we know Jane Roberts isn't just sitting in her living room making up cool, spooky stories about Napoleon in colorful words?
And that is the absolute beauty of the Seth material. Seth didn't just sit back and deliver grand lectures. He actively accepted tests. He welcomed them.
Enter section 4, the envelope experiment. This is where the metaphysical rubber meets the physical road.
Experiment number 45, to be precise.
Break down the setup for us, because this isn't some sterile lab with scientists in white coats. It's just a living room in upstate New York. But the protocol is actually surprisingly strict.
It was. So Rob Butts, Jane's husband, was a very meticulous practical researcher. He would often set up these double-blind tests to see if Seth could demonstrate actual clairvoyance remote viewing, basically. On this particular Monday night, before the session even started, Rob had prepared a sealed envelope.
And Jane have absolutely no idea what is inside it.
None whatsoever. Rob didn't even tell her he was planning to do an experiment that night.
Yeah.
He just placed the sealed envelope on the table, and he was thorough. It was double sealed, usually with thick layers of cardboard inside, so you couldn't possibly hold it up to the light and see a silhouette.
Okay, let's reveal the object first, just so you, the listener, can play along and see how crazy this gets. What was actually hidden inside the envelope?
It was a torn flap of a letter, just a ragged scrap of paper.
That's it, just blank paper.
Well, it had some writing on it. The day before, Rob had been hanging out at the house with his nephew, Doug. Doug was 14 years old at the time. They were just messing around, and they were testing Doug's ability to write with his non-dominant left hand.
Okay, so a 14-year-old boy writing awkwardly left-handed.
Right. They grabbed an old envelope that was lying around, they put it on a folded-up newspaper on the couch to use as a hard surface, and they just scribbled on the flap. Rob wrote his own name, and Doug wrote the word goodbye and his name, and they used a blue ink pen.
So, just to recap, inside the sealed envelope we have a torn scrap of paper, blue ink, 2 names written on it, written by a 14-year-old teenager and his uncle.
Now let's look at what Seth actually picked up. Remember, Jane is deep in a trance, her eyes are often closed, and the envelope is sealed on the table.
Let's go through these bullet point style. What is the very first impression Seth gets?
Seth says, connection with music.
Now, at first glance, if you're Rob, that looks like a total miss. Rob is a visual artist, a painter. He's not a musician.
But Jug, the 14-year-old nephew who actually wrote the word goodbye on the paper, his parents are both professional musicians. His mother is a music teacher. The boy literally grew up in a house overflowing with music and instruments.
Okay, so right away, Seth isn't just reading the physical paper, he is reading the history of the person who touched the paper.
Exactly. He is picking up on the invisible psychic residue left on the object. Then, Seth says, squares or cubes fitting into one another.
That is extremely specific visually. Squares or cubes fitting into one another. Was there a Rubik's Cube involved in this somehow?
Not quite, but it's even better. It turns out, earlier that exact same day when the left-handed writing happened, Doug's dad had brought over a vintage photo viewer. You know those old 1960s slide viewers?
Oh yeah, like a Viewmaster thing.
Exactly. It was a literal cube-shaped device, and you had to slide little square transparencies into it to see the pictures. They had been playing with it right before they wrote on the paper.
That is a direct hit on the environment where the writing took place.
Then Seth gets very direct about the subject. He says, a child, a male.
Hit. Doug is 14, a male child.
He says, the color blue.
Hit. The ink they used was blue.
But this next one is my absolute favorite because it really shows the granular texture of Seth's perception. Seth says, Something tall like a tree, wavering lines.
Book-running lines.
Rob was initially pretty confused by the tree part, but the wavering lines, think about it. Doug was actively demonstrating his left-handed writing. He's right-handed. He was balancing the newspaper on his leg on the couch. His hand was shaking. The physical writing on the paper was literally wavering lines.
Seth is actually seeing the physical quality of the ink line. He's feeling the boy's struggle to use his left hand.
Exactly. It's astonishing. And finally, Seth says, double exposure, 2.
Because there were exactly 2 people who wrote on that flap. Rob and Doug.
When you look at that, it is a startlingly accurate list of impressions for a random scrap of paper hidden inside a double-sealed envelope.
It is undeniable. But, and this is where it gets really chilling, there was a miss, wasn't there? Or at least something they initially marked as a miss.
Yes. This is the real Sherlock Holmes moment of the session. During their rapid-fire impressions, Seth very confidently said the word yellow.
Rob checks the paper. It's white paper. The ink is blue. There's absolutely no yellow on it.
So they note it as a miss. They figured he just got a wire crossed. But later in the session, Seth actually circles back to it. He stops and corrects them. He says the word yellow didn't refer to the paper itself. It referred to the bright copper gold buttons on Doug's new jacket.
Whoa.
Doug was a brand new suit jacket with these highly polished, shiny copper gold buttons when he first arrived at Rob and Jane's house. But he got hot, took it off, and hung it up in another room long before they ever sat down to write on the envelope.
Wait. So Seth is describing a piece of clothing that was in the room hours before the paper was even scribbled on, let alone put inside the envelope.
Yes. And this brings us right back to the mind-bending reality of the spacious present.
How so? Connect those dots for me.
To Seth, looking at that sealed envelope isn't like looking at a static, dead object. He isn't just using X-ray vision to see the word paper. He is seeing the entire living event of its creation simultaneously. He sees the wavering left hand, he hears the boy's musician parents in the background, he sees the blue ink drying, and he sees the shiny copper buttons on the jacket hanging in the closet 10 feet away.
It is all just one continuous movie playing out for him.
It's all one unified event in the spacious present. He doesn't draw a hard line between the ink on the page and the buttons on the boy who held the pen. To him, they are all part of the exact same energy signature.
That honestly gives me goosebumps.
Yeah.
Because it completely links the small parlor trick stuff to the massive universe-altering stuff. I mean, if he can accurately see the copper buttons that aren't even in the room anymore, maybe he really can see the dimension where Napoleon won at Waterloo.
That is the crucial connection. The envelope experiment acts as the tangible, physical proof of concept for all those wilder metaphysical claims. If perception is clearly not bound by time or space in a living room in Elmira, why on earth should it be bound by time or space in human history?
It makes the world feel incredibly huge.
Yeah.
And if I'm being honest, slightly terrifying. You realize how little control you have over the unseen mechanics of life.
And yet, amidst all this staggering cosmic talk, Seth always manages to bring it right back down to the purely practical. He is always very grounded in the physical, day-to-day well-being of Jane and Rob.
Which moves us beautifully into Section 5. The mundane personal advice. I absolutely love this part of the transcripts because it just reminds us that Jane Roberts was a real, normal person dealing with real, annoying problems.
She certainly was. And on this historic, multidimensional Monday night, she was dealing with terrible sinus trouble.
Even the psychic channel for infinite universal wisdom gets a stuffy nose in April.
Indeed she does. And Seth's advice to her is hilarious in its extreme specificity. First, he tells her to just stop drinking milk entirely, which, is pretty standard holistic advice for mucus buildup. But then, and this is so distinctly 1960s, he warns her to watch out for the dusty heat coming from the radiators.
The dusty heat. I can literally smell that exact smell just from you saying the phrase. That dry, metallic, burnt dust smell as an old house heating up.
It's so evocative. And notice that his prescription for her isn't some magical, mystical spell. He doesn't tell her to chant an ancient mantra or burn sage. He simply tells Rob that Jane should religiously give himself positive suggestions before sleeping that the condition will improve.
I want to point out the pronoun there. You said himself. Seth always referred to Jane as he, or by the male name Rupert, right?
Correct. Seth viewed physical gender as a very temporary, superficial focus. He knew Jane's larger internal essence, her whole, if you want to use that word, as fundamentally male in its tone or frequency, so he consistently used he and him when speaking about her larger self.
There was also a really funny little anecdote in this section about their landlady, Marion, I think her name was.
Oh, Marion, yes. She is the ultimate grounding wire for this entire cosmic story. Apparently, Marion was usually absolutely terrified of the Seth sessions. She thought they were demonic or spooky.
Which, to be fair to Marion, if my tenant suddenly started speaking in a booming masculine trance voice about alternate dimensions and Napoleon, I might be a little spooked too. I'd probably check the lease agreement.
Fair point.
Mm.
But she had finally gathered up the courage to actually sit in on a session recently. And her husband, a guy named Jimmy, wanted the inside scoop from her.
Of course he did. Jimmy comes home from work, hears his wife sat in a room with an all-knowing spirit medium, and his first question isn't, hey, what is the true nature of the eternal soul?
No, definitely not. Jimmy's burning question is, can the spook tell me about my financial future?
It is just so deeply human. Forget the infinite universe. Am I going to be rich anytime soon?
Seth's response to Jimmy's query is very dry and amused. He basically tells Rob Jimmy is worried about his health and his money. Which, by the way, Seth had already discussed in previous sessions. He didn't indulge him. He didn't give him a winning lottery number.
I love that so much. It really shows that even when people are given a direct, open line to infinite universal knowledge, most of us just want to know if we're going to be okay. We just want to know our bills are paid and our cough is going to go away.
And Seth totally validates that. He doesn't mock Jimmy for it. He addresses the health anxieties. He addresses Jane's sinuses. He deeply understands that while we are these vast, multidimensional beings creating realities, we are also just people living in a physical world with rent to pay and runny noses.
He creates this really beautiful, grounded balance. We are infinite consciousness capable of rewriting human history. But we also really need to remember to dust our radiators.
Precisely. We permanently have 1 foot in the infinite spacious present and 1 foot planted firmly in Elmira, New York.
So, as we start to wrap up this massive deep dive into session 248, let's try to synthesize all of this, because we have covered a staggering amount of ground today.
We really have. We started with a baseball that never actually lands. We moved through the biological illusion of space and time. We saw Napoleon completely conquer Europe in a parallel living dimension. And we ended with a torn scrap of paper that somehow carried the invisible ghost of a copper button.
What is the big final takeaway here? For the listener who's out there driving to work right now or doing the dishes or just sitting alone in the dark listening to us, why does any of this actually matter to their life today?
I think the ultimate takeaway from session 248 is that you are not small. And you are not trapped. We so often feel totally trapped by our past. We say, well, I made this terrible mistake 10 years ago, so this is just my life now. It's set in stone. Or we feel trapped by the present. We think, I can only see 3 inches in front of my face, so I have no idea where I'm going or what my purpose is.
Right. We feel like victims of linear time.
But Seth is loudly saying, tear down those walls. The past is entirely malleable. The future is infinitely broad. You are throwing the ball in a million different directions at once. With every thought you have, you are actively creating vast, complex realities that you can't even see yet.
The universe is transparent to the inner senses.
Yes. If you just close your physical eyes and look inward, you might actually start to see where the ball really lands. Or even better, you might realize that you are the one deciding where it lands over and over again in every single moment.
I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought. Really provocative one to just chew on for the rest of your day. If Seth is right, and the past is truly changeable, if you changed your past right now, today, would you even remember the old one?
Oof, that is the question.
Is your memory actually an objective record of what physically happened? Or is your memory just a temporary perception of the current probability you happen to be sitting in right now? Maybe you've already conquered your own personal Europe a dozen times today, and you just don't remember the defeats because you've shifted timelines.
That is definitely something to keep you awake tonight.
Definitely. Now, we have a strict mandate here at the end of the show, and honestly, it is a pleasure to give it. We've only scratched maybe 5% of the surface of this one single session today, let alone the entire book.
Okay.
If you want to really understand this material, you cannot just listen to us talk about it. You have to go directly to the source.
Absolutely. This incredible material comes from the early sessions, Book 6 of the Seth Material, and it is published by the New Awareness Network.
Do not just take our word for any of this. Study the books directly for yourself. They are incredibly dense, they're surprisingly funny, and if you let them, they will completely change your life and how you view reality. You can find them all at the bookstore at sethcenter.com. That is sethcenter.com/the early sessions.
Go read. Explore the spacious present for yourself. See what probabilities you can fulfill.
Thanks so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone.